I arrived home unannounced, the kind of homecoming no man should ever have to experience, only to find my wife, Eleanor, sleeping on the doormat in the freezing rain, clad in what looked like discarded rags. Marcus, my son-in-law, a man I'd once trusted with my daughter's happiness and my family's future, casually wiped his muddy, designer shoes on her sleeve. He laughed, a brittle, contemptuous sound that carried over the insistent drumming of the rain and the distant throb of party music, telling his wealthy guests that she was just the crazy maid who liked to sleep outside like a dog. I did not scream. My lungs, still fragile from the surgery, felt like they were turning to glass, but I held my breath. I stepped out of the shadows, from beneath the ancient, gnarled oak that had witnessed generations of Finch family gatherings, and the laughter died instantly. The air crackled, not just with the static electricity of the brewing storm, but with something far more ancient and dangerous. Because on Marcus's foot, gleaming even in the dim, rain-slicked porch light, was a limited edition loafer, a $1,200 piece of calfskin artistry that I had personally bought for him just last Christmas. The irony, a bitter, corrosive taste in my mouth, was that the mud he wiped so carelessly on my wife's rags was now tainting a gift from the very man he believed was dead. But he was about to pay a price higher than his life. If you're listening to this and you think you know the people you love, really know them, take a second, harder look, peel back the veneer of familiarity, the comfort of routine, and truly examine what lies beneath. My name is Jonathan Finch. Most folks in the shipping industry knew me as Jonah. I'm 72 years old, and for 4 decades, I didn't just run one of the largest logistics networks on the East Coast. I built it. From a single beat-up freight truck hauling fish from Portland Harbor to a sprawling empire that moved everything from industrial machinery to exotic produce across oceans, I knew the intricate dance of supply chains, the brutal calculus of risk, and how to spot a bad deal from a mile away. I'd negotiated with union bosses who could break bones with a handshake, outmaneuvered corporate raiders who saw human beings as mere line items on a balance sheet, and navigated the treacherous currents of international trade, where a misplaced comma in a bill of lading could cost millions. I understood the language of contracts, the subtle shift in a rival's gaze, the unspoken threats in a competitor's proposal. But the worst deal I ever made, the most catastrophic misjudgment of my entire life, wasn't in a boardroom or on a dock. It was in my own home. It was trusting my family. The rain was hammering against the roof of the old yellow cab as we pulled up the long, winding gravel driveway of what used to be our beloved estate in coastal Maine. Each gravel crunch beneath the tires was a tiny percussion, a prelude to the discord I was about to walk into. My chest still burned with a dull, throbbing ache, a constant, unwelcome companion, a stark reminder of the triple bypass surgery I had undergone secretly in a private, discreet clinic in Zurich 6 months ago. The ocean air, even filtered through the cab's slightly ajar window, felt heavy, cold, and somehow accusatory. I had told no one about the severity of my condition, not Eleanor, my wife of 50 years, not Clara, my only daughter, and certainly not Marcus, my slick, ambitious son-in-law. My reasons, at the time, felt noble, protective. I wanted to shield them from worry, from the crushing weight of impending mortality. I wanted to handle it alone, to face my vulnerability in solitude, just as I had handled every crisis, every challenge, every monumental decision in my life. The old school way, my way. This was a battle I believed I had to fight in isolation, a quiet war waged in the sterile confines of a Swiss hospital room. I paid the driver in crisp $100 bills, the kind that smelled faintly of old money in European banks, and told him to keep the generous change. His eyes widened slightly at the unexpected bounty, a silent testament to the wealth I had accumulated, wealth that was now, unknowingly, the very prize in a deadly game. I stood there for a moment in the deepening darkness, letting the cold, insistent rain soak into my heavy, custom-made wool overcoat. The fabric, usually a comforting shield, now felt like a lead blanket, chilling me to the bone. I looked up at the house, a grand, Federalist-style mansion I had purchased 3 years ago for $4.5 million, a sum that even in this exclusive corner of Maine had raised eyebrows. It wasn't just a house. It was a dream, a vision. It was a gift for Clara. Yes, a nest for her burgeoning family, but mostly it was intended as a sanctuary, a quiet harbor for Eleanor and me in our twilight years. A place where we could watch the tide roll in and out, where the only sounds would be the cry of gulls and the gentle sigh of the ocean. It was supposed to be quiet. It was supposed to be a home. But tonight, the windows were blazing with light, a garish, almost aggressive luminescence that spilled onto the manicured lawns. The bass from a monstrous sound system, vibrating through the very foundations of the house, rattled the heavy, double oak front doors with a vulgar rhythm, a sound that seemed utterly alien to the dignified silence of the Maine coast. Expensive cars, sleek predators of chrome and polished steel, lined the long driveway like a high-end showroom. Ferraris, Porsches, Bentleys. Vehicles that spoke of excess and ostentation, parked haphazardly, as if by people who cared little for property. It looked like a celebrity nightclub had been superimposed onto my quiet, respectable home. A surge of irritation, sharp and hot, mixed with the dull ache in my chest. I had explicitly told Marcus, with the kind of firm, unwavering tone that had quelled many a dock strike, no parties while I was gone. I had wanted Eleanor to have peace, quiet, and comfort during my convalescence. He knew her delicate sensibilities, her need for order and tranquility. I limped toward the front porch, each step a conscious effort. My legs, still weak and unsteady from months of bed rest and grueling physical therapy, felt like leaden weights. The wind howled off the Atlantic Ocean, a raw biting blast that cut through my expensive coat as if it were tissue paper. As I climbed the broad stone steps, my eyes, still adjusting to the shifting shadows and the pulsating lights, caught sight of a bundle of something lying on the welcome mat right next to the massive front door. At first, my mind, accustomed to logical patterns and orderly arrangements, dismissed it. I thought it was a pile of old laundry, perhaps forgotten by a maid, or maybe even a large dog bed that had been mistakenly left out in the escalating storm. My vision, though keen, was momentarily obscured by the rain-streaked darkness. I moved closer, squinting through the driving rain, trying to discern the object. And then it moved. A small, almost imperceptible tremor. It shivered. I froze. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My heart, still recovering, hammered against my ribs with a frantic, irregular beat. It was a person, a small, frail person curled into a fetal position, hunched against the unforgiving stone, trying desperately to conserve whatever minuscule warmth they had left. They were covered in a dirty, oversized gray sweatshirt, the kind of utilitarian garment that looked like it had been pulled from a dumpster behind a discount store. The fabric was matted with grime, soaked through with rain, clinging to the small form beneath. The person was clutching something tightly to their chest, a desperate hold, as if it were the last anchor in a drowning world. I knelt down, ignoring the sharp, sudden pain that shot through my surgical scars, a white-hot reminder of my own recent brush with death. My knees, usually steady as ship anchors, popped and groaned in protest as they hit the cold, wet stone. I reached out a trembling hand, a hand that had signed contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a hand that had steered the course of an empire, and gently, with a tenderness born of 50 years of devotion, pulled back the hood of the grimy sweatshirt. The air left my lungs in a ragged gasp. My breath hitched, caught in my throat, a silent scream of pure, unadulterated horror. It was Eleanor. My Eleanor. My wife of 50 years. The woman who had stood by my side when I was a struggling truck driver earning minimum wage, her elegant hand in mine, her unwavering faith my anchor. The woman who even in her youth had possessed an innate grace, wearing imitation pearls with the dignity of a queen. The woman who had, in her maturity, truly blossomed, a beacon of refined elegance, whose every movement spoke of quiet strength and understated beauty. Now she was unrecognizable. Her once lustrous silver hair, a crown that had always been meticulously coiffed, was matted and filthy, tangled with leaves and what looked like bits of garden debris. Her face, usually soft and gently lined, was gaunt, the skin stretched taut over her cheekbones like brittle parchment paper, revealing the stark architecture of suffering. Her lips were a shocking, unnatural blue from the cold, cracked and bleeding. The smell, a combination of urine, old garbage, and the pervasive dampness of the storm, was sickeningly heavy, assaulting my senses. It was a stench that spoke of neglect, of deliberate degradation. "Eleanor," I whispered, my voice a raw, broken thing, cracking with a grief so profound it threatened to shatter me. She did not open her eyes. She merely whimpered, a small, animalistic sound, and pulled the object in her hands closer, clutching it to her emaciated chest as if it were a fragile, precious treasure. My gaze fell upon it. My stomach turned. It was a heel of stale bread, hard as a rock, crusted with mold, a relic of deprivation. She was holding it like it was a priceless diamond, a desperate, final comfort. "Eleanor, it's me." I tried again, my voice a little stronger, fighting through the wave of nausea and despair. "It's Jonah. You're Jonah." She flinched away from my touch, a violent, almost instinctive recoil. Her head darted from side to side. Her eyes, when they finally fluttered open, were wide and unfocused, filled with a primal terror, the eyes of a hunted animal trapped and cornered. She muttered something incoherent, a string of terrified sounds that made no sense, garbled fragments of fear. She did not know who I was. The woman who had known my every thought, my every fear, my every dream for half a century, now looked at me with the blank, panicked stare of a stranger. The realization, a shard of ice in my heart, was almost as painful as seeing her suffering. They hadn't just hurt her body. They had ravaged her mind. Before I could fully process the utter horror of what I was seeing, before I could even formulate a coherent thought, the heavy oak front doors, the very ones I had envisioned opening to welcome friends and family, swung open with a theatrical flourish. A wave of artificial warmth, carrying the cloying scent of expensive perfume, stale alcohol, and the thundering beat of loud jazz music, rolled out onto the porch. Laughter, boisterous and self-satisfied, spilled out with it, mocking the scene of suffering unfolding in the shadows. Marcus stepped out. He looked impeccable, almost offensively so. He was wearing a navy blue Italian suit, a sartorial masterpiece that I knew cost upwards of $3,000 because I had seen the credit card statement, folded precisely, not a single wrinkle. He held a heavy crystal tumbler of scotch in one hand, the amber liquid swirling tantalizingly, and a thick Cuban cigar in the other, a plume of expensive smoke curling into the rainy night air. Behind him, silhouetted against the opulent interior lights, were 3 men and 2 women, all dressed in evening wear, their faces flushed with drink, holding champagne flutes. They were the kind of people who frequented exclusive clubs and yacht regattas, their laughter echoing hollowly in the night. Marcus took a deep, theatrical breath of the night air, stretching his arms, a wide, confident smile plastered on his face. A man who truly believed he owned the world. And in his mind, for now, he did. "Great party, Marcus," one of the men boomed, clapping him on the shoulder with a familiarity that grated on my nerves. "You really outdid yourself this time. The real estate market in coastal Maine must be booming, eh?" Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of genuine mirth, more a practiced rumble of self-congratulation. "You know me, Blake," he boasted, puffing out his chest slightly. "I have the golden touch. Everything I touch turns to, well, to gold." He took another confident step forward. Then his gaze, casually dismissive, drifted downward. He saw Eleanor, my Eleanor, curled up on the mat. He did not look surprised. He did not look concerned. He did not look even remotely affected. He looked, quite simply, annoyed. He looked at my wife, the woman who had nurtured his own wife, the woman who had welcomed him into our family, the way one looks at a piece of gum stuck stubbornly to the pavement, an unsightly inconvenience. Watch your step, folks," Marcus said loudly, his voice dripping with an exaggerated mock apology that was far more insulting than any direct insult. He lifted his right foot casually, almost carelessly. He was wearing the limited edition calfskin loafers I had given him for Christmas, the ones I had spotted in a boutique on Fifth Avenue and thought would be perfect for his sophisticated taste. The price tag, a whopping $1,200, was a mere footnote to the thought I had put into the gift. And then, right in front of my eyes, an act of such casual, profound cruelty that it burned itself into my memory. He placed the sole of his pristine shoe squarely on the shoulder of my wife's dirty, rain-soaked sweatshirt. He dragged his foot down her arm, slowly, deliberately, wiping the mud and grime from the garden, not onto the welcome mat, but onto her clothes, onto her very person. It was a calculated act, a public degradation, a deliberate marking of territory. "Marcus, what is that?" One of the women, her face a mask of delicate distaste, asked, wrinkling her nose in disgust, as if the very air around Eleanor was contaminated. "Is that a person?" Marcus laughed again, a condescending, dismissive bark. "Oh, don't pay any attention to that." He waved a dismissive hand, the Cuban cigar sending up a plume of pungent smoke. "That's just the old maid. She's completely senile, crazy as a bat. Thinks she's a guard dog or something, refuses to sleep inside. Says the spirits bother her in the guest rooms, or some such nonsense. Honestly, we let her sleep out here because she ruins the furniture. And the smell, honestly, it's just awful." The guests chuckled nervously, a few exchanging uncomfortable glances, but none intervened. They were too deeply ensnared in Marcus's web of opulence and implied power. "She looks hungry," the same woman ventured, a flicker of genuine concern in her eyes. "She's fine, Jessica," Marcus said, taking a long, deliberate sip of his scotch, his gaze sweeping over the woman with an intimacy that made my stomach churn. "Jessica. So, that's her name. She likes it. It's part of her condition. The doctor says it's good for her. Builds character, you know. Come on, everyone. Let's go by the pool. I want to show you the plans for the new wing I'm building. It's going to be something truly spectacular. A glass-enclosed infinity pool that looks out over the ocean. Imagine that. It'll make this place the crown jewel of coastal Maine." He kicked Eleanor lightly in the ribs, not hard enough to break a bone, but hard enough to convey a clear, unmistakable message. Asterisk move. "Get out of the way, you old hag, asterisk." Eleanor let out a small, wounded cry, a sound like a trapped bird, and scrambled backward on her hands and knees, pressing herself against the cold brick wall, trying desperately to make herself invisible, to shrink into nothingness. My vision went red, not with the hazy blur of tears, but with a cold, dark, almost primordial rage that flooded my veins. It replaced the weakness in my body, pushing aside the dull throb in my chest, making me forget the fragile state of my surgical scars, making me forget the cane I was using, left leaning against the porch railing. In that moment, the strength of the man who used to load cargo ships with his bare hands, the man who had physically wrestled with a corrupt dock foreman, returned to me, a surge of raw, untamed power. I felt the familiar burn of adrenaline, honed over decades of fighting for every inch, for every deal, for every victory. I stepped out from behind the large stone pillar, my shadow lengthening across the porch. The harsh porch light, once just a glaring nuisance, now illuminated my face, casting stark relief on my jaw, my eyes. Marcus was mid-laugh, turning back to his guests, his arms still around Jessica. He froze. The laughter died in his throat, choked off by a sudden, terrifying realization. The Cuban cigar, still lit, slipped from his manicured fingers and hit the cold stone floor with a soft hiss, a tiny spark dying in the rain. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like his blood had evaporated, leaving him a pallid, ghostly white. His mouth opened, a gaping maw of disbelief, but no sound came out. The guests, sensing the sudden, seismic shift in the atmosphere, stopped laughing. Their champagne flutes, once symbols of celebration, now seemed heavy, forgotten. They looked from Marcus to me, their expressions a mix of confusion and dawning apprehension. The loud jazz music from inside, once so pervasive, seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the relentless drumming of the rain and the terrifying silence of the porch. I stood there, the rain dripping from the brim of my hat onto my face, a grim mask of resolve. I looked at my wife, my Eleanor, cowering against the wall, clutching her piece of stale bread like a talisman against the encroaching darkness. And then I looked at the man I had welcomed into my family, the man I had offered my daughter's hand, my legacy, my trust. I did not shout. I did not scream. My voice, when it finally came, was low, calm, and terrifyingly steady. It was the voice of a man who had seen the abyss and returned, stripped of all pretense, left only with cold, lethal intent. "Marcus," I said. The name was a judgment, a pronouncement. He took a stumbling step back, almost tripping over Eleanor, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "J. Jonah," he stammered, his voice a broken thing, utterly devoid of its earlier bravado. "D-Dad, you're supposed to be in Switzerland. You're supposed to be dead." The words hung in the air, a chilling confirmation of his ultimate plan. I finished the sentence for him in my head, because that is what he looked like. He looked like he was seeing a ghost, a specter risen from the grave to claim its due. I looked down at his feet, at the mud-streaked, limited edition calfskin loafers. "Those loafers cost $1,200, Marcus," I said, my voice still dangerously calm, each word a slow, deliberate hammer blow. He looked down at his shoes, then back up at me, his eyes wide with a panic that bordered on pure madness. "But the price you are about to pay for what you just did," I continued, taking a slow, deliberate step closer, asserting my presence, my power, "will be far more expensive than your life." The glass of scotch, a symbol of his arrogance and misplaced confidence, slipped from his trembling hand and shattered on the stone porch, sending shards of crystal and amber liquid everywhere, a fitting end to his performance. Just then, Clara, my daughter, appeared in the doorway behind him, drawn by the sudden, terrifying silence. She was wearing a diamond necklace, a vintage Cartier piece that had belonged to Eleanor, a gift from me for our 40th wedding anniversary, now gleaming with an almost obscene brilliance against the hollow of her throat. When she saw me, her face, usually so composed, went utterly blank with shock. She grabbed the door frame, her knuckles white, to keep from collapsing, as if the very sight of me had drained the strength from her legs. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath, a faint, lost sound. I looked at her, at my daughter, my flesh and blood. I looked at the glittering diamonds around her neck, a symbol of a love and a history she seemed to have forgotten. And then I looked back at her mother, my Eleanor, still shivering, still cowering in the mud, clutching her stale bread. The contrast, a brutal, unforgiving tableau, was a judgment harsher than any words. "Get inside," I said, my voice low, but carrying the weight of absolute authority, the kind of command that left no room for argument. "The party is over." Marcus moved faster than a striking cobra, fueled by a desperation that was almost admirable in its intensity. The raw, animal fear on his face vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of manufactured concern so thick, so perfectly crafted, it was suffocating. He rushed past me, a blur of expensive fabric, scooping Eleanor up from the cold stone as if he hadn't just kicked her ribs a moment ago, as if he hadn't just wiped his muddy shoes on her. The transition was seamless, terrifyingly manipulative. "Dad, oh my God!" he shouted, his voice pitching up into a performance of frantic worry, a stage actor delivering his most impassioned lines. "Dad, why didn't you tell us you were coming? We were so worried about you in Zurich. The recovery. The stress." He turned to the stunned guests who were still holding their champagne flutes, frozen in the doorway, their faces a mixture of confusion and morbid curiosity. "My father-in-law," he explained, his voice laced with feigned sorrow. "The surgery. It affects his memory. He gets confused. He wanders. It's part of the post-operative delirium, you see." He looked down at Eleanor, cradling her dirty, matted head against his expensive Italian suit, without so much as a flinch at the smell, a sickening display of false piety. "And Mom, oh, Eleanor, you naughty girl. You know the doctor said 20 minutes for the cold therapy, not an hour. You'll catch your death." He looked at me, his wide, innocent eyes chilling my blood, a master manipulator at work. "It's a new holistic treatment, Jonathan, for her circulation. She insists on doing it outside on the stone. We can barely stop her, bless her heart." I stood there, leaning heavily on my cane, watching him, my face an unreadable mask. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, a breathtaking display of psychological warfare. He was rewriting reality in real time, covering his monstrous cruelty with a veneer of medical care, of concern, of love. It was a performance so audacious, so utterly contemptible, that it almost commanded a twisted respect. Almost. "Come inside," Marcus urged, gesturing to the guests to clear a path, his voice now imbued with a tone of solicitous care. "You must be freezing, Dad. Let's get you warmed up. We'll get you a nice brandy, a warm blanket. You'll be right as rain." We moved inside. Or rather, I was herded inside, the reluctant center of a meticulously constructed illusion. The heat hit me first, a blast of artificial warmth carrying the cloying scent of expensive perfume, stale alcohol, and the lingering aroma of the fine food that had been served. It was a stark contrast to the biting cold outside, yet it felt equally chilling. I looked around the great room, the heart of the house, the space I had envisioned filled with warmth and laughter, the quiet dignity of a family estate. My room, my house, but it was not my house anymore. The hand-carved mahogany furniture I had imported piece by painstaking piece from Florence, Italy, specifically chosen for this space, pieces that held generations of craftsmanship, was gone. The rare marine art collection, passed down through the Finch lineage, oil paintings depicting historic ships and rugged coastal scenes that I had collected and curated for 30 years, was missing. In their place were gaudy, gold-plated statues of Greek gods and white leather sofas that looked like they belonged in a Miami nightclub, not a venerable family estate in coastal Maine. The very walls, once painted in a soothing, classic Nantucket blue, had been repainted a jarring electric blue, a color that screamed for attention, a crude, desperate attempt at modernity. My legacy, the very essence of my taste, my history, had been stripped to the studs and replaced with cheap flash, a vulgar display of stolen wealth. It was a desecration. Clara, my daughter, stood by the massive carved marble fireplace. She was shaking slightly, her hand gripping a fresh glass of wine so hard her knuckles were white, as if she were clinging to it for dear life. Her face was pale, her eyes, usually so bright, were shadowed and unfocused, likely nursing a hangover from the cheap champagne Marcus had been pouring like water. I looked at her throat, at the diamond choker, the vintage Cartier piece I had bought Eleanor for our 40th anniversary, a symbol of enduring love. It was worth well over $50,000, a significant investment, and it was now resting, with an almost sickening irony, on Clara's neck. She saw me looking at it. Her hand flew up instinctively to cover the glittering diamonds, a gesture of guilt, but she did not take it off. She couldn't even look me in the eye, her gaze fixed instead on the dancing flames in the fireplace. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling, fragile as glass. "You look thin." "Where is my furniture, Clara?" I rasped, my voice calm, almost unnervingly so, but inside I was screaming. The rage was a cold, white-hot fire, threatening to consume me. "Where are your mother's doctors? Why does she look like a concentration camp survivor?" Marcus interrupted before she could even formulate an answer, his performance still in full swing. He gently deposited Eleanor onto one of the white leather sofas where she curled up immediately, muddying the pristine, expensive leather. He didn't flinch. "We redecorated, Dad," he said with a practiced, enthusiastic smile, the salesman's smile he used to close deals on condos that didn't exist yet. "Modernized the place to increase the property value. You know how the market is. Always got to stay ahead of the curve, right?" He turned to the lingering guests, seeking their approval, their complicity. "And the doctors? Oh, they were expensive frauds, Dad. Absolutely fleecing us. Quacks, really." He shook his head, a picture of righteous indignation. "We're treating her holistically now. Kale smoothies, fresh air, crystal therapy. It's much better for her spirit. Much more natural." He was smiling that same salesman smile, polished and utterly devoid of sincerity. I reached into my coat pocket, my fingers closing around the cold, familiar metal of my satellite phone, a secure device I always carried, a relic of my past in international logistics. I needed the police. I needed an ambulance. More than anything, I needed to get Eleanor out of this house, out of this hell, before morning. "I'm calling the authorities," I said, pulling the device out, my thumb hovering over the emergency button. My voice was a low growl, a promise of swift, brutal retribution. "This ends now," Marcus lunged. He didn't strike me. He was too smart for that, too cunning to risk a visible assault with witnesses, even drunk and pliable ones, still around. Instead, he grabbed my wrist with a grip of iron, squeezing a specific pressure point on my forearm, a nasty trick I recognized from my days dealing with unruly dock workers. My fingers went numb instantly, losing all sensation, all control. He wrenched the phone from my hand with a speed that belied his apparent drunkenness, a frightening display of his underlying strength and predatory instincts. "No, no, no," he said, shaking his head at the guests who were watching with morbid curiosity, a perverse fascination. "See? The anesthesia? He's paranoid. He thinks we're enemies. It's a side effect of the bypass, post-operative delirium," the doctors warned us. He slipped my phone into his own pocket, patting it securely, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. "I'll keep this safe for you, Dad. You need rest. You're clearly not yourself." "Give me my phone, Marcus," I growled, trying to stand tall, trying to reassert my authority. But my chest was throbbing with a dull, insistent ache, and my legs felt like lead weights, betraying my weakened state. "Gentlemen," Marcus snapped his fingers, his voice suddenly sharp, devoid of its earlier charade of concern. Two men, built like brick outhouses, stepped out from the hallway, leading to the kitchen. They were not my security detail, the discreet but formidable team I kept on retainer. I had never seen them before. They were massive, wearing ill-fitting black suits that strained across their enormous shoulders, their necks as thick as tree trunks, their eyes dead and vacant, completely devoid of empathy or human warmth. They moved with the heavy, predatory grace of hired muscle, professional enforcers. "Escort Mr. Finch to his suite," Marcus ordered, his voice flat, emotionless. "He needs quiet. No phone, no disturbances. He's very agitated." One of the men grabbed my arm, his fingers, thick as sausages, dug into my bicep, hitting a nerve that sent a searing shockwave of pain down to my hand, momentarily paralyzing me. I tried to pull away, to fight them off, but I was weak, too weak to truly resist their brute strength. My body, still recovering from the surgery, felt like a betrayal. I looked at Clara. She was my flesh and blood. I had paid for her college, her extravagant wedding, her first house. I had doted on her, indulged her, believed in her. "Clara," I said, my voice rough, raw, with a desperate plea. "Stop this. Help me." She turned her back. She picked up her glass of wine, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the fireplace, refusing to acknowledge the father being manhandled, abducted, in her own living room. The betrayal, sharp and sudden, was a physical blow, far worse than any pain in my chest. It felt like a part of my soul had been ripped away. The men did not drag me toward the grand staircase leading to the master bedroom on the second floor, the room Eleanor and I had shared for decades, filled with our memories, our life. No, they pulled me toward the narrow, unassuming service door, almost hidden from view, that led to the lower levels of the house, to the basements and cellars. "My room is upstairs," I said, digging my heels into the plush, custom-made carpet, resisting with every ounce of strength I had left. "Not anymore," Marcus said, stepping close to me, his voice dropping to a whisper, so low and venomous that only I could hear. It was a private message, a final insult. "The master suite is ours now, Dad. You get the guest quarters downstairs. It's quieter there, better for your condition." He winked, a slow, deliberate wink, full of chilling malice, a gesture that told me exactly who was in charge now. The guards hauled me backward, their grip unyielding. As we passed the large hallway mirror, a grand, ornate piece that had reflected generations of Finches, I caught a glimpse of the group. Marcus, looking smug, adjusting his cuffs, already savoring his victory. Clara, drinking to forget, her face a mask of complicity and self-loathing. And Eleanor, Marcus was holding her upright, arranging her, posing as the beautiful son-in-law, the caring protector. As I was dragged away, our eyes met in the reflection of the glass. I searched for my wife. I searched for the woman who knew my soul, the woman who had held my hand through bankruptcies and successes, through joy and grief, through the agonizing loss of our son. but there was nothing there. Her pupils were dilated to the size of saucers, swallowing the iris, leaving her eyes like black, empty pools. She did not look at me with love, or even recognition. She looked at me with the blank, glassy stare of a stranger. She did not blink. She did not cry out. It was as if the woman I loved, the vibrant, intelligent, compassionate Eleanor, had vacated her body, leaving only a shell behind. They had not just neglected her, they had erased her. And as the basement door, a heavy, unadorned slab of wood and metal, loomed closer, a terrifying clarity washed over me. I realized, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was now a prisoner in the empire I had built. The heavy metal door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in my bones, a sound that sealed my fate, leaving me in near total darkness. The click of the industrial-grade lock, engaging with a brutal, metallic clang, was like a gunshot, echoing in the sudden, suffocating silence. I was alone, trapped in the cold, damp air of what used to be my prized wine cellar. I tried to stand, to regain some semblance of dignity, but my legs finally gave out, betraying me completely. I slid down the rough concrete wall, hitting the grimy floor with a groan that tore at my surgical stitches, sending a fresh wave of pain through my chest. The room smelled of mildew, rotting cardboard, and a pervasive, lingering dampness that clung to everything. My eyes adjusted slowly to the oppressive gloom, illuminated only by a thin, cruel sliver of light bleeding in from the gap beneath the heavy door. This was not the climate-controlled sanctuary I had meticulously built to house vintage Bordeaux and rare scotches, the kind of cellar that rivaled any in New England. The custom-built cedar racks, designed to cradle precious bottles, were gone. The state-of-the-art temperature control system, a vital necessity for preserving delicate vintages, had been ripped out, leaving raw wires dangling like broken nerves. In its place were piles of broken furniture, discarded electronics, garbage bags filled with God knows what decaying detritus, and the unmistakable, rusted shapes of old garden tools, all covered in a thick layer of dust and neglect. They had turned my elegant bespoke wine cellar into a common junk room. And now, I realized with a fresh wave of despair, I was just another piece of trash, to be stored away, forgotten, until they decided what to do with me. I sat there for a moment, breathing through the pain in my chest, trying desperately to calm the frantic racing of my heart before it triggered an alarm on the internal pacemaker monitoring my recovery. I needed to think. I needed a plan. But before I could formulate a strategy, before I could even begin to process the enormity of my situation, the lock clicked again, a jarring sound in the heavy silence. The door swung open, and a hulking silhouette filled the frame. It was one of the guards, the one with the dead eyes. He was holding something, someone. He stepped inside, his movements rough and utterly devoid of tenderness, and unceremoniously dropped his burden onto a pile of old, moth-eaten curtains in the corner. It was Eleanor. My Eleanor. She landed with a soft, sickening thud, making no sound of protest, no cry of pain, just a small, almost inaudible whimper that broke my heart into 1,000 jagged pieces. Her body, once so elegant, so strong, was now a fragile, broken thing. "Sweet dreams," the guard sneered, his voice laced with cruelty, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey. "Don't make a mess." The door slammed shut again, plunging us back into the oppressive semi-darkness, the click of the lock echoing with a fresh sense of dread. I scrambled across the floor on my hands and knees, ignoring the sharp debris. Shards of glass, splinters of wood, rusted metal, digging into my palms, tearing at my skin. "Eleanor," I whispered, my voice raw with desperation, reaching out until my trembling fingers brushed the rough, damp fabric of her sweatshirt. "Eleanor, it's me. It's Jonah." She was shivering violently, her small body racked with uncontrollable tremors. I pulled her into my arms, trying to share whatever meager body warmth I had left, trying to offer some comfort in this desolate purgatory. She felt incredibly fragile, like a bird made of hollow bones, delicate and breakable. Her skin was ice cold, clammy to the touch. "I need to check you," I said softly, keeping my voice steady despite the cold, dark rage boiling in my gut, threatening to overwhelm me. I need to see if you're hurt. She did not resist. She was past resisting, past fighting, past even feeling. She lay limp in my arms, staring at nothing, her eyes wide and vacant in the gloom. I carefully rolled up the sleeves of her filthy sweatshirt. In the dim light filtering under the door, I saw them, dark purple bruises encircling her wrists. They were perfect rings, the unmistakable, sickening marks of restraints. They had been tying her up. My jaw clenched so hard I felt a tooth crack, a sharp, excruciating pain that was somehow a welcome distraction from the agony in my heart. I moved my hands to her back, gently lifting the hem of her shirt, checking for broken ribs from Marcus's casual kick earlier. As I did, I saw the imprint, a muddy tread mark stamped clearly onto her pale, translucent skin. It was the sole of a designer loafer, a sickeningly precise replica of the one Marcus had been wearing. He had branded her like cattle, a deliberate act of dehumanization. The cold fury inside me solidified, hardening into a diamond-sharp resolve. I gently patted her pockets, searching for anything. A weapon, a key, a hidden phone, anything that could offer a sliver of hope, a means of escape. My hand closed around a piece of paper that had been balled up and shoved deep into the pocket of her pants. I pulled it out and smoothed it flat on the grimy concrete floor, angling it toward the thin sliver of light under the door. The handwriting was jagged and hasty, scrawled in what looked like a cheap red marker. It was a list. Monday, morning water, evening crusts. Tuesday, morning water, evening broth. Wednesday, fasting. At the top of the page, written in angry, block capital letters, were the words, dog menu. I stared at the paper, the letters swimming before my eyes, blurring into a grotesque accusation. This was not just neglect. This was systematic torture. This was starvation. They were starving her. They were dehumanizing her. They were treating the woman who raised their wife, the woman who signed the checks for their first cars, the woman who had welcomed Marcus into her home with open arms. Like a stray animal they were trying to kill without leaving a trace, without leaving a single incriminating mark. The depths of their depravity, their casual cruelty, was unfathomable. I folded the paper with a slow, deliberate movement and put it in my own pocket, a burning, tangible piece of evidence. This was the death warrant I would use to bury them when I got out of here. And I would get out. I shifted my position, leaning back against a rusted, dilapidated filing cabinet, the cold metal digging into my back. I needed to contact the outside world. Marcus had taken my phone, but he didn't know everything about me. He didn't know that my paranoia, a trait that had served me exceptionally well in the cutthroat, often treacherous world of international shipping, a world rife with pirates, corrupt officials, and backstabbing rivals, extended to my accessories. It was a habit born of necessity, of survival. I pulled back the cuff of my left sleeve. I was wearing a vintage Omega Seamaster, a watch I had worn for 20 years, a gift from Eleanor, a symbol of our enduring time together. To the naked eye, it was just a classic mechanical timepiece, elegant and understated. But 6 months ago, before I left for Switzerland, before the surgery, before this nightmare began, I had it modified by a specialist in Tel Aviv, a brilliant, eccentric engineer who worked wonders with microelectronics. Inside the casing, beneath the intricate gears and springs, was a microtransmitter, a GPS beacon capable of sending a distress signal to my private security team in London with a single, specific press of the crown. It was my failsafe, my last resort, an invisible lifeline. I verified Eleanor was asleep, her breathing shallow but steady, a fragile rhythm in the silent darkness. I brought the watch close to my face, my thumb hovering over the crown. I rotated the bezel 3 times to the left and pressed the crown down for 5 full seconds, a precise, practiced sequence. A tiny red LED, usually invisible beneath the 12 marker, should have pulsed green to indicate a signal lock, a connection established, hope rekindled. It pulsed red. Once, twice, then nothing. My stomach dropped like a stone. No signal. My blood ran cold. I looked up at the ceiling. The floorboards above were vibrating, a low, incessant hum. The bass from the party, though muffled, was getting louder, thumping like a second, monstrous heartbeat. But that wasn't what was blocking the signal. A simple floor, even a thick one, wouldn't stop a military-grade transmitter. Jammers. Marcus had installed signal jammers. He had turned this house, my home, into a black site, a communications void, an impenetrable fortress of his own design. He knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't just a greedy son-in-law seizing an opportunity, an impulsive act of avarice. This was a calculated, hostile takeover. He had isolated the house, blocked all communications, and secured the perimeter with his hired muscle. He was running this like a prison, a private kingdom built on deceit and cruelty. I lowered my wrist, the weight of the watch suddenly feeling like a lead cuff. Panic flared in my chest, hot and sharp, threatening to choke me. If the signal couldn't get out, no one knew I was here. My lawyer, Miss Kincaid, my brilliant, formidable fixer, thought I was still in recovery in Zurich. My staff, my loyal employees, thought I was unreachable, perhaps on a secluded retreat. I was a ghost, a forgotten man. The music upstairs shifted. The heavy bass of the club music, the soundtrack to Marcus's decadence, faded slightly, replaced by the clinking of glasses and the jarring feedback of a microphone. A speech. Someone was giving a speech. I looked around the desolate, junk-filled room, searching desperately for a weakness, an escape route. The door was solid steel, reinforced. The walls were thick concrete foundation, impenetrable. But this was an old house, built in the 1922, a testament to old-world craftsmanship, not modern security. The ventilation system, though retrofitted decades ago, retained its original, rudimentary design. I spotted it in the corner near the ceiling, a metal grate covered in layers of dust and cobwebs. It was the intake vent for the old gravity furnace system. The ducts were metal, and metal carried sound. I dragged a heavy wooden crate, a relic of some forgotten shipment, over to the corner, wincing as the effort pulled at my still tender chest. I climbed up, balancing precariously on the unsteady surface, my muscles screaming in protest. I pressed my ear against the cold, grimy metal of the grate. The sound was tiny and distorted, echoing down through the aluminum tubes, but I could hear it. "To the future!" Marcus's voice boomed, amplified and echoing, sounding like he was standing right above me. He must be in the library, directly overhead, a room that had once been my private sanctuary, now his stage. "To vision, to taking what is yours." Applause, scattered and enthusiastic, rippled through the ductwork, a chorus of complicity. "And specifically," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a conversational, almost intimate tone that carried even better than his shouting, a practiced trick for securing deals, "to the deal of the century. Ladies and gentlemen, in my hand, I hold the deed to the new commercial complex in Dubai, a project fully funded by the Finch Family Trust." My blood ran cold. The Finch Family Trust. That was the bulk of my liquid assets. Hundreds of millions of dollars intended for charitable foundations, for Eleanor's long-term care, for the future security of my descendants, even Clara. It required 2 signatures to access, mine and a witness. It was a fortress of legal protection. "But Braden," a woman's voice cut in, slurring slightly. It was Clara. She sounded drunk, her words thick with wine. "Daddy didn't sign the release. The bank won't release the funds without the biometric authorization." I pressed my ear harder against the grate, ignoring the rust and dust flaking into my hair, a desperate need for every single word. "Don't worry about Daddy, babe," Marcus said. I could hear the smirk in his voice, dripping with contemptuous amusement. "Daddy is downstairs taking a very long nap." There was a pause, a sudden, unnerving silence. The guests must have moved away, or the conversation had shifted to a more private corner, because the background noise faded, leaving only Marcus and Clara's voices, stark and clear. "What do you mean, Marcus?" Clara hissed, her drunken stupor suddenly pierced by a sliver of genuine fear. "You said we were just going to keep him quiet until the power of attorney kicked in." "The power of attorney takes too long, Clara," Marcus replied, his voice suddenly cold, stripped of its charming veneer, revealing the chilling calculation beneath. "And your father, he's tougher than he looks. Did you see him tonight? He's lucid. He's angry." If he gets to a phone, if he gets to that shark Kincaid, we are finished. We go to jail, Clara, for fraud, for elder abuse. Do you want to go to jail? Do you want to wear orange instead of Chanel? No, Clara whimpered, a lost, terrified sound. No, please. Then we have to accelerate the timeline, Marcus said, his voice hard, unyielding. I have the papers ready. The do not resuscitate order. The transfer of assets due to medical incapacitation. I just need his thumbprint. He paused, and the silence in the vent was deafening, a vacuum of dread. And if he doesn't want to give it? If he doesn't give it? Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper, thin with terror. Then we pull the plug, Marcus said, his words chillingly casual, spoken with the same indifference as discussing a business deal. We say it was a heart complication. He just had triple bypass after all. It happens all the time. Old men die. Hearts fail. Who is going to question it? The doctor on my payroll certainly won't. I gripped the metal grate so hard my fingers turned white, my knuckles aching. He was planning to murder me tonight, not with a gun, not with a knife, but with a syringe, with a fabricated medical emergency, disguised as a natural death, a cold, surgical assassination. But he's my dad, Clara sobbed softly, a pathetic, half-hearted protest. He's an obstacle, Clara, Marcus snapped, his patience clearly at an end. He's the only thing standing between us and $800 million. Now, dry your eyes. Go mingle. I'm going downstairs to have a little chat with him. I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse. I heard the heavy thud of footsteps walking away from the vent. Then the distinct sound of a door opening and closing upstairs. He was coming. I climbed down from the crate, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, a frantic, desperate beat. I looked at Eleanor, curled up on the pile of rags, oblivious to the fact that her husband was about to be executed. I had maybe 5 minutes. 5 minutes before Marcus came through that door with his fake papers and his hired muscle. 5 minutes to turn this prison into a fortress. Or into a weapon. I looked around the room with new eyes. I didn't see junk anymore. I saw assets. I saw opportunity. I saw a thick, heavy glass wine bottle, one of the last remaining, collecting dust in a forgotten rack. I saw a coil of rusty electrical wire, discarded, tangled. I saw the high-voltage junction box on the wall, its cover hanging loose, its inner workings exposed. I was not a helpless old man. I was Jonathan Finch. I had fought unions and pirates and corporate raiders. If Marcus wanted to pull the plug, he was going to get a shock he never expected. I grabbed the wine bottle and smashed the neck against the concrete wall, creating a jagged, deadly glass shiv. Let him come.